I never thought a gravel driveway would become the biggest fight of my life, until the day I opened my mailbox and found that bright yellow citation taped to the inside. My name is Isaac Bradford, and I had just moved into what I thought was my dream property in rural Harford County, Maryland, back in March of 2025. The 5-acre lot with its century-old farmhouse and that beautiful meandering gravel driveway lined with oak trees felt like stepping back into a simpler time. Little did I know that a certain HOA president named Patricia would turn my peaceful country life into an absolute nightmare. The letter was typed in an aggressive font that somehow managed to look angry even on paper. It stated that my gravel driveway was in violation of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association standards, and that I had 30 days to pave it with either asphalt or concrete, or face daily fines of $200. I stood there in my flannel shirt and work boots, dirt still under my fingernails from planting tomatoes in the garden, completely blindsided. When I bought this place, the real estate agent never mentioned anything about HOA regulations concerning driveways. The previous owner, old Mr. Henderson, had lived here for 60 years, and that gravel driveway had been there since the house was built in 1924. I called the number listed on the letter immediately, my hand shaking slightly with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. A woman answered on the third ring with a clipped, professional tone that somehow managed to sound condescending even in just the word hello. "This is Patricia Thornton, HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates. How may I help you?" "Yeah, hi, this is Isaac Bradford. I just received a citation about my driveway needing to be paved. There must be some mistake because my driveway has been gravel for 100 years. There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Mr. Bradford, there is no mistake. All properties within Meadowbrook Estates must maintain paved driveways as per our community standards, Section 12, Paragraph 4. Your property falls within our jurisdiction." "But this house predates any HOA by decades," I protested, walking back toward my house and staring at the beautiful gravel path that crunched satisfyingly under my boots. "The previous owner never had to pave it. Mr. Henderson was granted a courtesy exemption due to his age and length of residence," Patricia said, her voice taking on that particular tone that people use when they think they are being incredibly reasonable while actually being completely unreasonable. "However, with the sale of the property, that exemption expires. You are now required to comply with current HOA standards. I never agreed to join any HOA. There was nothing in my closing documents about this. Your property falls within the geographical boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates, which was established in 2019. Membership is automatic for all properties within these boundaries, as filed with the county. You should have received the HOA bylaws in your closing package. Regardless, ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from following them. You have 30 days, Mr. Bradford. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling like I had just been run over by a truck. I immediately started digging through all my closing documents, spreading them across my kitchen table. After 2 hours of reading through every single page, I found a brief mention of the HOA on page 47 of a 60-page document, buried in the legal jargon. It was easy to see how I had missed it. The mention was vague and did not list any specific requirements or dues amounts. The next morning, I drove into the county seat of Bel Air to visit the county clerk's office. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The clerk, a helpful woman in her 50s named Margaret, pulled up the property records and HOA filing on her computer. "Okay, So Meadowbrook Estates HOA was filed in July of 2019, she said, scrolling through the information. It looks like it encompasses about 200 properties in the western part of Harford County. Your property at 4782 Oak Grove Road is technically within the filed boundaries. But my house was built in 1924, I said, leaning forward. Doesn't that mean anything? Margaret frowned, clicking through more screens. Actually, there might be something here. Maryland has grandfathering laws for pre-existing conditions. If your gravel driveway existed before the HOA was established, and especially if it existed before modern zoning laws, you might have a case for a grandfathered exemption. Hope bloomed in my chest. How do I prove that? You would need documentation showing the driveway existed prior to the HOA filing. Old photographs, property surveys, tax records, anything that shows the driveway in its current state before 2019. I spent the rest of that day, and the next 3 days going through everything I had received from Mr. Henderson's estate. The old man had passed away just 2 months after selling me the property, but his daughter had given me several boxes of old photographs and documents related to the house. I found photographs dating back to the 1940s that clearly showed the gravel driveway. I found a property survey from 1998 that specifically noted existing gravel drive on the diagram. I even found an old newspaper clipping from 1967 showing the house in the background of a story about a local farming award, with the gravel driveway visible in the image. Armed with my evidence, I made copies of everything and prepared a formal response to the HOA. I sent it via certified mail to ensure they could not claim they never received it. In my letter, I explained the grandfathered status of my driveway, cited Maryland property law, and included copies of all my documentation. I felt confident that this would resolve the issue. I was wrong. 5 days later, Patricia Thornton showed up at my property in person. I was outside working on repairing a section of fence when I heard a car coming up the driveway. A white Mercedes SUV pulled up, and out stepped a woman who looked exactly like what I had imagined. She was probably in her late 40s, with an aggressively styled blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She picked her way across my gravel driveway in high heels, her face twisted in obvious distaste at the crunching stones beneath her feet. "Mr. Bradford, I presume?" she called out before she even reached me. "That's me," I said, setting down my hammer and walking over to meet her. I did not extend my hand because I could already tell this was not going to be a friendly conversation. "I am Patricia Thornton. We spoke on the phone. I received your little letter with your supposed evidence." She said the word evidence like it was something distasteful she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "It's not supposed evidence. Those are historical documents proving my driveway predates your HOA by nearly a century." "That may be, but it does not change the current requirements. You see, Mr. Bradford, I have been president of this HOA for 4 years, and in that time, we have worked very hard to elevate the standards of this community. When people drive through Meadowbrook Estates, I want them to see a cohesive, well-maintained neighborhood that reflects the quality of people who live here. Your gravel driveway is an eyesore that drags down property values." I felt my jaw clench. "First of all, this is not some suburban subdivision. These are rural properties on multiple acres. Second, my driveway is well-maintained and perfectly functional. Third, and most importantly, it is grandfathered in under Maryland law. You cannot force me to change it." Patricia pulled off her sunglasses and looked at me with cold blue eyes. "Mr. Bradford, I suggest you reconsider your position. The HOA has significant legal resources at our disposal. We can make your life very difficult if you choose to fight this. The fines alone will add up quickly. $200 per day is $6,000 per month. Can you afford that? Can you afford the lawsuit I will file if you try to collect those fines? I shot back. I am not backing down on this, Patricia. My driveway is legal and grandfathered. End of story. Her face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might actually start yelling. Instead, she took a deep breath and put her sunglasses back on. You have 24 days left, Mr. Bradford. I would use them wisely. She turned and walked back to her Mercedes, struggling to keep her heels from sinking into the gravel with every step. I watched her drive away, kicking up small rocks as she went too fast down the driveway. My hands were shaking with anger and adrenaline. That evening, I called a lawyer. I found a local attorney named Robert Chen who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in Bel Air, and he agreed to see me the next day. When I showed up with my folder of evidence, he spent over an hour reviewing everything while I sat anxiously in the chair across from his desk. This is actually a pretty strong case, Robert finally said, leaning back in his chair. Maryland law is very clear about grandfathered property conditions. If a condition existed before an HOA was established, and especially if it existed before modern zoning regulations, the HOA generally cannot force you to change it. The photographs and survey you have here clearly establish that your gravel driveway has been in continuous existence since at least the 1940s, and likely since the house was built in 1924. So I do not have to pave it, I asked, relief flooding through me. You should not have to, no. However, that does not mean the HOA will not try to make things difficult for you. These disputes can get ugly. They might try to fine you anyway and then put a lien on your property. They might try to find other violations to cite you for. Some HOA boards can be very petty when they do not get their way. So, what do? I am going to draft a formal legal response citing the specific Maryland statutes that protect your grandfathered driveway. I will also include a cease and desist notice warning them against attempting to collect any fines related to this issue. If they continue to push this, we can file for a declaratory judgment from the court establishing your legal right to maintain the gravel driveway. That will cost you some money in legal fees, but it will settle the matter permanently. Do it, I said without hesitation. I am not letting them bully me into spending $15,000 or $20,000 to pave a perfectly good driveway just because Patricia Thornton thinks gravel is beneath her standards. Robert smiled slightly. I have dealt with Patricia Thornton before on another case. She is what we call a zealous HOA president. She genuinely believes she is improving the community, but she has a tendency to overstep legal boundaries. I will get this response drafted and sent out by the end of the week. True to his word, Robert sent a comprehensive legal response to the HOA 3 days later. I felt good about the situation. I felt like I had done everything right, followed proper procedures, and had the law on my side. I thought Patricia would receive that letter from a lawyer and realize she could not win this fight. I was wrong again. Instead of backing down, Patricia escalated. 2 weeks after Robert sent his letter, I received a notice that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me seeking a court order to compel me to pave my driveway and to collect accumulated fines, which they claimed now totaled $2,800 for 14 days of alleged violation. Robert had warned me this might happen, but I was still shocked at the audacity. They are trying to intimidate you into settling, Robert explained when I called him, my voice probably louder than it needed to be. This is actually good for us in a way because now we will get a judge to rule on the grandfathered status definitively. Once we have that ruling, this issue is done forever. How long will this take? Probably a few months to get a court date. HOA cases are not usually considered urgent by the courts. In the meantime, do not pay any fines, but do keep detailed records of everything. Take photographs of your driveway regularly, date stamped. Document any interactions you have with Patricia or anyone else from the HOA. If they do anything that could be considered harassment, I want to know about it immediately. The next 2 months were some of the most stressful of my life. Patricia apparently decided that if she could not get me on the driveway issue, she would find everything else she possibly could to cite me for. I received a violation notice because my grass was allegedly too long, despite the fact that my property was 5 acres of mostly wild meadow, and the HOA bylaws only specified lawn maintenance for properties under 1 acre. I got another citation because I had a small storage shed that was supposedly the wrong color, even though it was forest green and blended in with the trees around it. I got a notice about having an unregistered vehicle on the property because my vintage 1972 Ford pickup truck that I was restoring in my barn was apparently visible from the road through a gap in the trees. Every single citation came with a threatened fine of $100 to $200 per day. Robert advised me not to pay any of them and to document everything. He said it was clear harassment and would actually help our case by showing a pattern of behavior. But knowing that intellectually did not make it any less stressful to keep getting these threatening letters every few days. The situation got worse in early June. I came home from a trip to the hardware store to find Patricia standing in my driveway with 2 other people, a man and a woman I did not recognize. They were taking photographs of my property with professional cameras. When I pulled up, Patricia did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. "What are you doing on my property?" I demanded, getting out of my truck. "Documenting violations for our court case," Patricia said calmly. "This is Gerald Morton, our HOA vice president, and Sandra Hughes, our compliance officer. We are well within our rights to inspect properties within HOA boundaries. You are not within your rights to be on my private property without permission," I said, pulling out my phone. "You need to leave right now, or I am calling the sheriff. We are standing on the driveway, which is visible from the public road. We are not trespassing," Patricia said, but I noticed the other 2 people had already started walking back toward a car parked at the edge of my property. "The driveway is still part of my private property. Leave. Now." Patricia gave me a thin smile. "We have everything we need anyway. See you in court, Mr. Bradford." I immediately called Robert and told him what happened. He said to file a police report to document the incident, so I called the Harford County Sheriff's Office. A deputy came out about an hour later and took my statement. He was sympathetic, but said that, unless they came back after being warned, there was not much he could do. He did say that I could post no trespassing signs if I wanted, which I went out and bought that same afternoon. The court date was finally set for August 15th. Robert filed our response to the HOA lawsuit, including a countersuit for harassment, and demanding that the court issue a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from attempting to enforce any regulations on my grandfathered driveway. He was confident we would win, but I had learned not to take anything for granted when it came to Patricia Thornton. In mid-July, something happened that changed the dynamic of the entire situation. I was at the local feed store picking up some supplies when I ran into Tom Henderson, the son of the man who sold me the property. Tom was about 65, a retired electrician who still lived in the area. "Isaac, "How are you doing with that place?" Tom asked, shaking my hand warmly. "I love the property, but I am having some issues with the HOA," I admitted. I filled him in on everything that had been happening with Patricia and the driveway dispute. Tom's face darkened as I talked. "That woman is something else. You know, she tried the same thing with my dad about 5 years ago, right after the HOA was formed. Sent him letters demanding he pave the driveway. Dad was in his 80s by then and did not have that kind of money. The stress of it really got to him." "What happened?" I asked. "Dad went to a county council meeting and raised hell. Turns out, there were about a dozen other properties in the same situation, old farms and homesteads that predated the HOA. The county ended up passing a local ordinance specifically protecting pre-existing conditions on properties that were over 50 years old. The HOA backed off after that, at least from Dad. They knew they could not win." My heart started racing. "There's a county ordinance." My lawyer never mentioned that. "It was passed in 2020, specifically because of the issues the Meadowbrook HOA was causing. You should be able to find it in the county records. I think it was Ordinance number 20-42 or something like that." I thanked Tom profusely and immediately drove to the county administration building. I found the ordinance he mentioned after about 30 minutes of searching through the records. It was Harford County Ordinance 2020-42, titled Protection of Historic and Pre-Existing Property Conditions. It specifically stated that any property feature that existed for more than 50 years could not be forced to change by an HOA unless it posed a genuine health or safety hazard. It was exactly what I needed. I called Robert immediately and read him the ordinance over the phone. There was a long pause, and then he let out a low whistle. "I cannot believe I missed that. This is perfect, Isaac. This is not just about common law grandfathering anymore. There is a specific local ordinance protecting your driveway. This case just became a slam dunk." Patricia Thornton does not have a leg to stand on. So, what do we do? I am going to file an amended response including this ordinance. I am also going to motion for summary judgment. That means we ask the judge to rule in our favor without even needing a full trial because the law is so clear. This could be over within a few weeks. Robert filed the amended response the next day. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had been living with this stress for almost 5 months now, and finally, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Patricia's response was predictable. Within 3 days, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney arguing that the county ordinance did not apply because it only protected features that were being properly maintained. And they claimed my gravel driveway was not properly maintained because it had some weeds growing along the edges and a few potholes that needed filling. It was grasping at straws, and we all knew it. Robert filed a response with photographs I had taken showing that my driveway was in excellent condition, with only minor and normal wear that any driveway, gravel or paved, would experience. He also pointed out that the HOA had never cited me for maintenance issues with the driveway, only for the fact that it was gravel rather than paved, which proved that their complaint was not about maintenance at all. The summary judgment hearing was scheduled for August 1st, 2 weeks before the original trial date. I took the day off work and dressed in my best suit, which I had not worn since my brother's wedding 3 years ago. Robert met me outside the Harford County Circuit Courthouse in Bel Air. He was carrying a briefcase full of documents and wearing the confident expression of a lawyer who knows he has a winning case. "Just remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question," Robert said as we walked into the courthouse. "This should be straightforward." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and there were only a few other people there. Patricia sat at the opposite table with a lawyer in an expensive suit who looked irritated to be there. She was dressed in another power suit and had her hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her look even more severe than usual. She did not look at me as we entered. Judge Martin Reynolds entered, and we all stood. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and the weary expression of someone who has heard every kind of dispute imaginable. After we sat, he looked over his glasses at both tables. This is a motion for summary judgment in the case of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA versus Isaac Bradford regarding a property dispute. Counsel for the defendant, you may proceed. Robert stood and launched into a clear, concise explanation of the case. He explained the history of my property, the grandfathered status of the driveway, and then introduced Harford County Ordinance 2020-42. He provided the judge with copies of all the historical photographs, the property survey, and the text of the ordinance. Your Honor, this ordinance was passed specifically to prevent situations like this one. Mr. Bradford's gravel driveway has existed for over 100 years. It is well maintained and poses no health or safety hazard. The HOA has no legal basis to force him to change it. Furthermore, their pattern of harassment, evidenced by multiple frivolous citations issued after Mr. Bradford refused to comply with their initial demand, shows that this lawsuit is not about legitimate community standards, but about retaliation. The HOA's attorney stood up, a man named Douglas Pritchard, who had an air of barely concealed condescension. Your Honor, while the ordinance cited by opposing counsel does exist, it includes a provision for proper maintenance. We have evidence that Mr. Bradford's driveway is not being properly maintained, with weeds, potholes, and drainage issues. Judge Reynolds looked at the photographs Robert had submitted. These photographs were taken when? Last week, Your Honor, Robert said. The judge studied them for a long moment. This looks like a normal gravel driveway to me. I grew up on a farm with a gravel driveway, counsel. This is what they look like. A few weeds along the edge is not failure to maintain. If the HOA wants to argue that the driveway is not being maintained, they need to show actual evidence of significant deterioration, not just normal wear. Your Honor, we believe that the standards of the community require, Pritchard started, but the judge cut him off. The standards of the community do not override county ordinances or state law regarding grandfathered property conditions. I am looking at photographs from the 1940s here that clearly show this driveway in essentially the same condition it is in now. That is a century of continuous existence. This is exactly the type of situation the ordinance was designed to protect. Judge Reynolds set down the documents and looked directly at Patricia. Mrs. Thornton, is it? Patricia stood up quickly. Yes, Your Honor, Mrs. Thornton. I understand you want to maintain high standards in your community, but you cannot use the HOA as a weapon to force changes that are not legally required. This man bought a historic property with a historic feature. He has every right to maintain that feature as it has existed for the past 100 years. You understand? Patricia's face was red, but she nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds turned back to the attorneys. I am granting the defendant's motion for summary judgment. The HOA is hereby permanently enjoined from attempting to force Mr. Bradford to pave his driveway, or from collecting any fines related to the driveway's surface material. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Bradford's legal fees in this matter, as the lawsuit was frivolous given the clear protection provided by county ordinance. Is there anything else? Robert stood. Your Honor, we would also ask that the court order the HOA to cease all retaliatory citations against Mr. Bradford. Since this dispute began, he has received numerous citations for minor or non-existent violations that appear to be harassment. The judge looked at the HOA attorney. Counsel. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, the HOA has a duty to enforce all applicable regulations. I am sure they do, but they also have a duty not to abuse their authority. I am going to order a 60-day moratorium on any citations to Mr. Bradford's property unless there is a genuine emergency or health hazard. That will give everyone time to cool down. If I see this case back in my courtroom because of continued harassment, I will not be pleased. Is that clear? Both attorneys acknowledged that it was clear. The judge signed the order and dismissed us. I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in months. As we left the courtroom, Patricia hurried past us without a word, her attorney following behind her while speaking urgently into his phone. That went about as well as it possibly could have, Robert said, shaking my hand outside the courthouse. You won. Completely. The driveway is protected, the fines are dismissed, and they have to pay your legal fees, which I will bill generously after all the nonsense they put us through. Thank you, I said and meant it. I could not have done this without you. You did the hard part by finding that ordinance. That was the key to everything. Go home, enjoy your property, and hopefully you never have to deal with Patricia Thornton again. I drove home in a state of euphoric relief. The stress I had been carrying for 5 months evaporated as I turned onto my beautiful gravel driveway, listening to that satisfying crunch under my tires that apparently drove Patricia crazy. I parked in front of my farmhouse and just sat there for a few minutes, looking at the oak trees and the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the leaves. This was my home, and I had fought for it and won. For about 6 weeks, things were quiet. I did not receive any citations from the HOA. I did not see Patricia Thornton driving past my property. I focused on the work I loved, finishing the restoration of my vintage pickup truck, tending my garden and making improvements to the farmhouse. Life was good. Then, in mid-September, something bizarre happened. I was at the local diner having breakfast on a Saturday morning when Tom Henderson came in and sat down at my booth without asking, his face grave. Isaac, we need to talk. I just heard something pretty disturbing about Patricia Thornton and the HOA. What now? I asked, setting down my coffee. You know my neighbor, Bill Morrison. His property is also in the HOA boundaries. Bill just found out that Patricia has been collecting dues from everyone in the HOA at $300 per year, but she has not been depositing all of the money into the HOA account. Bill is the treasurer, and he was doing the quarterly reconciliation. There is almost $40,000 missing over the past 3 years. I stared at him. Are you saying she has been embezzling HOA funds? That is exactly what I am saying. Bill confronted her about it 2 days ago, and she told him that she used the money for community improvements that were not properly documented. But when he asked for receipts or any kind of proof, she got angry and told him it was none of his business how she managed the funds. Bill is talking about going to the police. This was bigger than my driveway dispute. This was actual crime. Has he filed a report yet? He is scared to. Patricia has a lot of influence in this area. Her husband is a vice president at a bank in Baltimore, and they have money and connections. Bill is worried about retaliation. If she has been stealing from the HOA, she needs to be held accountable, I said. That money belongs to all the homeowners, and if people do not speak up, she will just keep doing it. Tom nodded slowly. I know you are right. Bill wanted me to feel you out because he knows you already fought with Patricia once and won. He is thinking about organizing some of the other homeowners to go to the police together. Safety in numbers, you know. Tell Bill I am in. Whatever he needs, I will help. 3 days later, I attended a secret meeting at Bill Morrison's house with about 15 other homeowners from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Bill was a retired accountant in his 70s, a meticulous man with thick glasses and a patient demeanor. He had prepared a detailed presentation showing the financial discrepancies in the HOA accounts. Over the past 3 years, the HOA has collected approximately $240,000 in dues from our members, Bill explained, pointing to a spreadsheet on his laptop that he had connected to his television. However, only $197,000 was deposited into the HOA bank account. That is a discrepancy of $43,000. A woman I did not know raised her hand. Could there be a legitimate explanation? Maybe expenses that were paid before deposit? I thought of that, Bill said. But HOA bylaws require all funds to be deposited first and then dispersed through checks with dual signatures, mine and Patricia's. These funds never made it to the account at all. They were collected and then disappeared. How was she collecting dues? I asked. Mostly by check, but about 30% of homeowners pay cash. Patricia always insisted on personally collecting the cash payments. She said it was more convenient for elderly members who did not like to write checks. Now we know why she wanted to handle the cash herself. The room erupted in angry murmurs. These were people who had been paying money they thought was going toward community improvements, only to find out it had been lining Patricia's pockets. There is more, Bill continued, and the room quieted down. I started looking more carefully at the expenses that were documented. There are multiple charges for services that I cannot verify were actually performed. For example, there is a $10,000 payment to a company called Greenview Landscaping for community entrance beautification. But when I looked up Greenview Landscaping, I could not find any record of the company existing. The check was cashed, but I do not see any evidence of landscaping work being done at our community entrances. So she is not just stealing cash dues, she is also creating fake companies and writing checks to herself. Someone asked, incredulous. That is what it looks like. I found at least 3 different company names that do not appear to exist, totaling about $25,000 in payments over 2 years. This was way beyond HOA overreach. This was fraud, embezzlement, and possibly money laundering. I looked around the room at the shocked and angry faces of my neighbors. We need to go to the police, I said firmly. This is not something we can handle internally. Bill, you have all this documentation organized. I have everything. Bank statements, copies of checks, records of dues payments, everything. Then we go to the Harford County Sheriff's Office tomorrow and file a formal complaint. All of us who are willing should go together and give statements. The group agreed. The next morning, 11 of us showed up at the sheriff's office in Bel Air. Bill had prepared a comprehensive binder of evidence. We were directed to the Financial Crimes Unit and met with Detective Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened intently as Bill explained the situation. "This is very thorough," Detective Williams said, paging through the binder. "You have done a lot of the investigative work for us. I am going to need to verify all of this and get subpoenas for the bank records, but based on what you are showing me, there is definitely probable cause to investigate. How many total homeowners are in this HOA?" 212 properties, Bill said, and Mrs. Thornton has been president for how long? 4 years. She was elected in 2021. Detective Williams made notes. "Okay, I need to caution all of you not to confront Mrs. Thornton about this. Do not discuss this investigation with anyone outside this group. We do not want to give her warning to destroy evidence or try to flee. I am going to start pulling records today, and we will likely bring her in for questioning within the next week or two." We all agreed to stay quiet. It was hard to go about normal life knowing what I knew, but I did my best. I focused on my property and tried not to think about Patricia and what she had done. I actually felt a little bad for her husband and kids if she had any. This was going to destroy their lives even if they had nothing to do with it. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I was drinking coffee on my porch when I saw police cars drive past on the main road, heading toward Patricia's subdivision. My phone rang about 20 minutes later. It was Tom Henderson. "Turn on the news. They just arrested Patricia." I grabbed my remote and found a local news station. Sure enough, there was a breaking news banner showing footage of Patricia Thornton being led out of her large colonial house in handcuffs, her face covered with a jacket, as officers guided her into a police car. The reporter was explaining that she had been arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and theft by deception, in connection with her role as president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Over the next few days, more details emerged. Detective Williams and her team had traced the stolen funds to a personal bank account Patricia had opened under a slightly different name. They had also confirmed that the 3 companies she had written checks to were fictitious entities she had created. The total amount stolen was now estimated at over $68,000 once they accounted for all the fraudulent expenses. The local news picked up the story enthusiastically. HOA president arrested for embezzling from her own community was exactly the kind of story that got attention. Reporters interviewed several homeowners, though I declined to participate. I had had enough drama to last a lifetime. Patricia's lawyer tried to arrange a plea deal, but the state's attorney was not interested in going easy on her. The case was too clear-cut and too public. Her trial was scheduled for January 2026, but in early December, she changed her plea to guilty on all counts in exchange for the prosecution recommending a lighter sentence. On December 18th, I attended her sentencing hearing along with about 30 other members of the HOA. The judge was not the same one who had heard my case, but a stern woman named Judge Rachel Martinez, who had a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime. Patricia stood before the judge looking nothing like the confident, aggressive woman who had stood in my driveway demanding I pave it. She had lost weight, her hair was no longer perfectly styled, and she kept her eyes down as the judge reviewed the case. "Mrs. Thornton, you held a position of trust in your community," Judge Martinez said. "People elected you to manage their collective resources and to serve their interests. Instead, you betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. You stole money that your neighbors had contributed in good faith. You created false documents and fake companies to cover your tracks, and when confronted, you tried to intimidate people into silence." Patricia's lawyer started to say something, but the judge held up her hand. "I have read all the victim impact statements. I have reviewed the financial records. What strikes me most is the sheer audacity of your actions. You are not stealing to feed your family or pay medical bills. Your husband has a successful career, and you live in a $500,000 home. You stole out of greed and entitlement, believing that you were above the rules you so zealously enforced on others." The judge sentenced Patricia to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years, plus full restitution of the $68,000 she had stolen, and 5 years of probation after her release. Patricia broke down crying as the bailiff led her away. Her husband sat in the back of the courtroom, his face buried in his hands. I did not feel triumphant watching her being led away. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This woman had made my life miserable for months over something as trivial as a gravel driveway, all while she was actively stealing from the community she claimed to be protecting. The hypocrisy was staggering, but watching her life fall apart was not as satisfying as I thought it might be. After the sentencing, Bill Morrison organized a meeting to discuss the future of the HOA. With Patricia gone and the organization's reputation in tatters, there was serious discussion about simply dissolving the HOA entirely. Many of the properties, like mine, were historic farms and rural homesteads that had never needed or wanted HOA oversight in the first place. The HOA was Patricia's baby. Bill explained to the group of about 40 homeowners who attended the meeting at the local library. She was the one who pushed for its creation back in 2019. She convinced people that we needed it to protect property values and maintain standards. But look what it actually became: a tool for her ego and her theft. "I move that we vote to dissolve the Meadowbrook Estates HOA," Tom Henderson said, standing up. "We are mostly rural properties out here. We do not need this kind of organization. The county handles code enforcement just fine." The motion was seconded immediately. The vote was nearly unanimous, with only 3 people voting against dissolution. Those 3 were newer residents who had bought homes in the small subdivision where Patricia lived, and they were worried about property maintenance without HOA enforcement. But they were vastly outvoted. The legal process of dissolving the HOA took a few months, but by March 2026, exactly 1 year after I had received that first citation about my driveway, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA ceased to exist. The remaining funds in the account, after paying back what Patricia had stolen and covering dissolution costs, were divided among all the homeowners as a refund. I received a check for $947, which was my share of the remaining HOA funds plus the 3 years of dues I had paid before buying my property, which had been part of the sale transaction. It was not a lot of money, but it felt symbolic. The nightmare was finally, completely over. Life returned to peaceful normalcy. I finished restoring my vintage Ford pickup truck and took it to a local car show where it won 2nd place in its category. My garden flourished, and I sold produce at the local farmers market on weekends. The farmhouse slowly transformed under my care, each repair and improvement bringing it closer to its former glory while still maintaining its historic character. My gravel driveway, the source of all the drama, remained exactly as it had been for the past 100 years. The oak trees that lined it turned brilliant colors in the fall, and I loved the sound of the gravel crunching under my tires every time I came home. Sometimes, when I pulled into the driveway at the end of a long day, I thought about Patricia and that first day she had showed up in her white Mercedes, picking her way across the stones in her high heels, looking at my property with such contempt. She had been so certain that she had the power to force me to change something that had existed longer than she had been alive. She had been so confident that her rules and her standards mattered more than history, more than county ordinances, more than common sense. And in the end, that arrogance had not only destroyed her case against me, but had led to the discovery of her crimes and the destruction of everything she had built. There was a lesson in that, I thought. Something about humility and respecting what came before you. Something about how the drive to control others often comes from a place of being out of control yourself. Patricia had been stealing from the HOA for years, likely feeling invincible, and had channeled that sense of being above the rules into trying to enforce rigid standards on everyone else. It was projection at its finest, and it had come crashing down spectacularly. I reconnected with some of my neighbors after the HOA dissolved, and I heard stories about other people Patricia had targeted over the years. There was an elderly woman she had cited for having the wrong color mailbox. A young family she had threatened with fines because their kid's swing set was supposedly visible from the road. A veteran who had a small American flag display that Patricia claimed violated height restrictions for lawn decorations. All petty, all vindictive, all about control rather than genuine community improvement. With Patricia gone and the HOA dissolved, these people could finally relax and enjoy their properties without fear of arbitrary citations and escalating fines. The community did not fall into disrepair as Patricia had always warned it would. People maintained their properties because they took pride in them, not because some authoritarian HOA president demanded it. Property values remained stable. Life went on, just with less stress and more freedom. In the fall of 2026, Tom Henderson stopped by with a case of beer and a request. His father's old farm, which his sister now owned, was being featured in a local history book about Harford County agriculture. The author wanted to include stories about historic properties in the area and had asked about my place. "Your farmhouse and driveway are part of that history," Tom said as we sat on my porch watching the sun set. "That gravel driveway is one of the oldest continuously used driveways in the county." The author thought it would make a good story, especially with everything that happened with Patricia. I agreed to be interviewed, and the author, a local historian named Dr. James Morrison, who happened to be Bill's nephew, came out a week later. We walked the property as I told him what I knew about its history. He took photographs of the driveway, the farmhouse, the old barn, and the stone walls that marked the original property boundaries from the 1920s. "Places like this are disappearing, Doctor," Morrison said, snapping a photo of the oak-lined driveway with afternoon light streaming through the branches. "Development pressure, HOA rules, modern aesthetic preferences, they all push toward uniformity. What you did by fighting to preserve this driveway matters more than you might think. It is not just about gravel versus asphalt. It is about maintaining a connection to the past and respecting the character of a place." His words stuck with me. I had fought to keep my driveway because I thought it was beautiful and functional, and because I was angry at being bullied. But he was right that it meant something more than that. This property had history, and I was now a part of that history. Someday, probably long after I was gone, someone else would own this land and would see that gravel driveway and the old farmhouse, and would know that people had lived here, worked here, built something lasting. The book was published in the spring of 2027, and my property was featured in a 4-page spread with gorgeous photographs and a detailed history. There was even a sidebar about the HOA dispute and Patricia's eventual arrest, framed as a cautionary tale about the importance of local ordinances protecting historic properties. I bought a dozen copies and sent them to family and friends. Robert Chen, my lawyer, framed the judge's order protecting my driveway and gave it to me as a gift. It hung in my study, a reminder of a fight I had not wanted but had been forced to take on and had ultimately won. Looking at it, I felt proud not just of the victory, but of standing up for something I believed in when it would have been easier to just comply and move on. Life has a way of testing you in unexpected ways. I had bought a peaceful farmhouse in rural Maryland, expecting to spend my time gardening and working on old trucks and enjoying the quiet country life. Instead, I had been thrust into a legal battle with an overbearing HOA president who could not stand that someone would not bend to her will. That battle had revealed her corruption, led to her arrest, and ultimately resulted in the dissolution of the entire HOA. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had just agreed to pave the driveway that first day. Patricia would probably still be president, still be stealing from the HOA, still be making everyone's life miserable with her petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. My refusal to back down had set off a chain of events that freed an entire community from her control. That was worth every stressful moment, every threatening letter, every court appearance on warm evenings. I would sit on my porch with a cold drink and listen to the sounds of the country at night. Crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the wind rustling through the oak trees that line my gravel driveway. This was what I had wanted when I bought this place. Peace, connection to the land, a sense of history and permanence. I had fought for this and I had won. The gravel driveway that Patricia Thornton had been so desperate to make me pave was still here, still crunching under tires, still lined with century-old oaks, still exactly as it should be. And that felt like victory in the truest sense. Not just winning a legal case, but preserving something worth preserving and standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. The story made its way around the county and even got picked up by a few regional news outlets as a human interest piece. I did a couple of brief interviews, always emphasizing not just the preservation of the driveway, but the importance of standing up to bullies and knowing your rights. I heard from other people fighting HOA disputes in other counties and states, all of them encouraged by my story. One man from Pennsylvania sent me an email thanking me because my case had inspired him to research his own property's history. He discovered similar grandfathered protections and used them to fight an HOA that was trying to make him remove an old stone fence that his grandfather had built in the 1950s. He won his case, and the fence stayed. That made me happier than almost anything else that came out of the entire ordeal. My fight had helped someone else fight theirs. Looking back on everything, I realized that the day I found that yellow citation in my mailbox was one of those pivotal moments that you do not recognize at the time. I could have paid some contractors to pave the driveway and avoided all the stress. It would have cost me $15,000 to $20,000, but it would have been done. Instead, I chose to fight, and that choice changed everything, not just for me but for an entire community. Patricia Thornton is serving her sentence at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women in Jessup. I do not think about her often, but when I do, I hope she is using her time to reflect on how she got there. The woman who was so obsessed with controlling her community and forcing everyone to meet her standards ended up losing her freedom because she could not control herself. There is a certain poetic justice in that, though I take no pleasure in anyone's imprisonment. The former HOA members sometimes gather for informal neighborhood barbecues and potlucks, now free from the rigid structure Patricia had imposed. People are friendlier, more relaxed, more willing to help each other out. Without the constant threat of citations and fines hanging over everyone's head, the community actually became more of a community. We look out for each other because we want to, not because we are forced to. My property has become something of a local landmark, at least among people interested in historic preservation. I occasionally get requests from local schools or history clubs to visit and see the old farmhouse and its 100-year-old gravel driveway. I always say yes, because I think it is important for younger people to understand that history is not just in museums and textbooks. It is in the places we live and the things we choose to preserve. As I write this now, sitting at my kitchen table in the farmhouse, I can see the driveway through the window. The afternoon sun is making the gravel almost glow, and the oak trees are swaying in a gentle breeze. In a few minutes, I will go out and do some maintenance, filling in a few small potholes and trimming back some of the vegetation along the edges. Not because any HOA is forcing me to, but because I love this place and want to take care of it. That is how it should be. Property maintenance should come from pride of ownership and respect for your home, not from fear of some petty bureaucrat with a citation book and an inflated sense of authority. Patricia never understood that. She thought control and fear were what maintained standards. She was wrong, and her downfall proved it. The story of my gravel driveway and the HOA president who tried to force me to pave it has a happy ending. The driveway is protected forever. The HOA no longer exists. Patricia is paying for her crimes. And I am living peacefully on my 5 acres of Maryland countryside, exactly as I had hoped to do when I first saw this property and fell in love with it. Every time I drive up that gravel driveway and hear that satisfying crunch under my tires, I smile. It is the sound of home. It is the sound of history. And it is the sound of a battle fought and won, not with anger or vengeance, but with knowledge, perseverance, and the law on my side. That is a sound worth preserving for another 100 years, and thanks to the fight I was forced to take on, it will be.